Hello everybody, I'm back with another video here. I'm going to do something a little bit different today and talk to you about how to make your programmer or software developer resume stand out. My purpose behind making this video is that I see a lot of resume project videos out there and they just kind of repeat the same content over and over. Eventually, most people are going to end up making one or more of those cookie cutter projects. That leads to a bunch of candidates that are able to demonstrate good software development skill sets, but they don't stand out from their competition. And so really the idea behind this video is to tell you how you can elevate these projects and brainstorm projects of your own. I know when I was first making my resume projects that coming up with a creative idea was one of the hardest things for me to do. And so that's our first section of this video, is how to do creative brainstorming. So the idea here is to think of an idea outside of the box, right? And that box being, your typical to-do list app or your note app or your shopping app or what have you. Remove yourself from the world of code while you're doing this. So don't think about, just programming, like what am I capable of doing. That was a loop that I found myself stuck in a lot, was okay, what do I know how to do and what can I do with my skill set? Well, you can do a lot of things with your skill set, and you can learn a lot during this process as well. So remove yourself from the world of code. Think about some of your hobbies or interests, or maybe there's something that you're passionate about. Identify one thing in that space. So if your hobbies are golf, running, swimming, and fishing, don't pick all four of those things, right? Because that's not a cohesive idea, right? Maybe let's take your hobby of golf and maybe let's build a golf scorecard app. And then maybe you can share the scorecard with, some of your other friends through kind of a social media aspect to the application, right? There's an idea for you. So you want to identify one of your interests, and then if a creative idea like that doesn't just pop into your head, ask yourself the following question: is there a common problem or task associated with this interest that I can build a program or application to solve or make easier? Right? So identify that problem, right? And then say, okay, there's your application idea, right? So back to the golf example, maybe the problem is, well, I don't have an easy way to share my, awesome golf score with my friends. Build yourself a social media golf card sharing app, and there's your app idea. So the reason that creative brainstorming is so helpful in the interview process is it's going to do a couple of things for you. One, it's going to show your potential employer that you know how to be creative and think outside of the box. It's also going to give them a nice break from, maybe the 15 to-do list apps that they've seen, and then they come onto your cool idea. That's going to kind of give you a leg up before the interview's even started. The other thing it's going to show them is that you know how to identify a problem and come up with a solution to it. And developers and potential employers love seeing that, because that's 80% of the job, is identifying problems or identifying needs and coming up with solutions to those. So our next section is about the whole cookie cutter app space, right? And I know I just bashed on them, but if you can't come up with a creative idea, here's another kind of route you can take here. There are thousands of these cookie cutter project ideas out there on the internet. You can literally Google coding resume ideas and you will get hundreds and hundreds of blog posts. They all have pretty much the same content on them. But what you can do is take one of these pre-existing ideas. So like I mentioned earlier, the to-do list app or the note app, the shopping app is another one, and figure out what can you do to make it more unique or more advanced, right? So some ideas for you is you could take a note app and you could implement some kind of CRUD operations with it. If you're not familiar with the CRUD operations, they're the basic database operations of create, read, update, and delete. And you can see at the bottom there, Google Firebase, MongoDB. Those are some kind of backends that you can integrate with there as well. One thing I'll point about Google Firebase is that it implements more than just a backend database. You can do user authentication, you can do website hosting, you can do cloud storage, all sorts of weird things with that. The last thing you can do is utilize a complex library. So this is going to show potential employers that you know how to add advanced features to an application. That's something that developers are looking for. If you know how to write, say, JavaScript, that's great. But if you know how to write JavaScript and do some advanced techniques such as database operations, you've got a leg up on your competition there. And if you're going to utilize a complex library, that shows developers and potential employers that you know how to do that. One of the things you'll find when you enter the professional field, if you will, is that unless you're working for a really big company like Facebook or Google, a lot of stuff is utilizing a library. The whole point with libraries is to make your life easier so you don't have to create your own solution to common problems. If somebody's already done the work for you, use their work, assuming that you have permission to do so with licensing and all that. That's a whole nother topic. But that's going to give you another leg up on your competition if you know how to do both of those things. So the last idea here is not really so much of an idea as to what you can do. It's an idea of how you can do the project. And that's good documentation and project structure. So good documentation is really going to stand you out between your competition. You're going to be competing against a lot of at least satisfactory, competent developers when you're applying for your entry-level positions. However, if you can go into the space and present that you know how to document your code well, both with inline documentation and a README, that's going to give you a huge leg up, because employers are going to see that and say, not only are you a good developer, but you know how to organize your projects well. And speaking of project organization, planning a structure and architecture ahead of time shows that you know how to plan a project as well as code, and it also shows that you can stay organized. And here at the bottom, I've said that at bare minimum, you should have a well-organized README and a GitHub repository at the bare minimum for your project. But some things that you can add to give good documentation and good structure. You can do a requirements document. So if you don't know what that is, a requirements document is basically a big structured list of everything that you want the application to do, right? You typically are going to do that first, and obviously the requirements document can evolve over time, but you're going to do that first, and you kind of break it up and say, okay, what are the requirements for our MVP, or minimum viable product? What are our stretch goals? What are some things that would be cool to see implemented but are not immediate needs right now? So requirements document is good. You can do an architecture document as well. This can be something like a Lucid Charts flow diagram. You can use Adobe XD for this. But basically what you're going to do is draw a flow diagram with some different shapes, label the shapes, the different kind of structures or files you're going to have in your application, and then create some flows as to, okay, maybe you have like a login page as your first one, and then you have two arrows. What happens when the user successfully logs in? What happens when they don't successfully log in? And then maybe when they successfully log in, they go to the home page. Okay, when they click this button, where do they go from there? And so on. All right, so just kind of visually representing the flow of your application. So this last kind of bonus bit here is about the projects that I had on my resume when I landed my first internship. So if you have watched my videos before, you probably know a little bit about Space App. Space App is a simple web application that I built. It's built currently in Ionic Angular. So the purpose of that was to showcase that I knew how to use a framework, which is pretty important in the web development space. And that's what I do, is I do web development. So I built it in Ionic Angular, and the whole premise of the project was to showcase that I knew how to utilize external APIs to get data and then use that data to do something in the application. It's not a pretty app. If you watch the video, it's very like bare bones in terms of styling. But it does showcase the core functionalities. And that's another point I want to make is your app does need to look presentable, but we're not graphic designers. We're not, the best at coming up with color palettes and where things should be and how things should look, right? And a lot of firms and a lot of companies have graphic designers in-house that are really, really good at doing that. So it's not super important that your app looks the cleanest and has the coolest design on it, right? Implement some of that stuff, right? Because if you don't, your app is going to look terrible. And if you do implement some of that stuff, it'll show that you at least know how to work with CSS or whatever styling you use. But that's not the most important thing. The second app that I made is based off of the second thing that I talked about, which is the putting a twist on a simple idea. And I did an elevated to-do list app. So I took the to-do list idea and I elevated it using all of the stuff that you see listed. So I integrated the Firebase backend. I used user authentication, Cloud Firestore, Firebase hosting, Firebase storage. I think that's it for the Firebase. As in terms of like project structure, I made multiple user accounts on the system, so the idea was that you could formulate a company or an organization, add people to that company or organization, and then there was a privilege system, so if you had a higher privilege than somebody, you could see the tasks that they were doing. And the last system was photo verification. So I utilized a complex library to implement a system where once somebody completed a task, they had to take a picture and write a description, and then that got uploaded into the storage on the back end. So you could go in and see when people did a task, the picture of the completed task, and the description of how they did that task. So yeah, that's the video. Hopefully some of these tips helped you out. If you have any ideas or any tips that you use, feel free to put them in a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and reach out to me if you have any questions or you have any ideas of your own. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.